Welcome to Latent Treasures, a uniquely uplifting podcast filled with inspiring guests to brighten your week. Our show takes inspiration from a lesser-known quote from C.S. Lewis. What we want is not more little books about Christianity, but more little books by Christians on other subjects, with their Christianity latent. While I love books, this is 2020. And let's face it, audio is a lot easier to produce. But you are more than welcome to think of our little podcast as a bunch of little books about various topics lived by ordinary people. But these people are quite extraordinary in the way their faith drives them and fuels their journey. Journeys on which they're making profound impacts on everyone around them. We hope you'll be blessed by these stories and recognize that inside each of us is the ability to be similarly extraordinary. If you like our show, please subscribe. And if you find any individual show special, please like it and share it freely. In today's show, we welcome Jim Losey Jr. back to dive a little deeper into some fundamental strategies for good stewardship and financial management in our personal lives. If you enjoyed his first appearance, we're sure you'll get even more practical value in his comments today. From paying off debt to reducing tax liabilities, the show today is certainly filled with great wisdom we can all benefit from. We apologize for the short delay in new show releases as COVID issues, publication roadblocks, and other technical challenges set us back a bit, but we're back on track and hope you'll enjoy today's show. We again thank Cheyenne Summers for her continued support as our cover art artist and invite you to view her work further on our site, bethechurch.org, where you'll find her links in the show notes. And now, without further ado, please welcome back Jim Losey Jr. Welcome back, Jim Losey. I appreciate you getting back on our calendar. We wanted to continue our conversation with you as we were cut short a little bit last time, and we missed some of the most important parts of what we wanted to talk about. How are you doing today?
It's good to be here, Chad. Thanks a lot for having me back. And this is an area that I'm kind of passionate about. So, you suckered me into talking about myself there last time and all of my history and background and decision making and stuff. And we never got to the whole thing about, making a difference in this world. So it's great for another opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. So let's just dive into that. You mentioned, to a degree, what brought you into the financial world before. And a lot of that kind of ties to, as you and I were talking offline a little bit, to being able to help people kind of pursue their objective of pursuing the Great Commission with that work. Tell us a bit about how that connects.
Okay. So back in those days where I was biochemistry grad working at a biotech company, trying to figure out my life and what I wanted to be and do, I had spent some time in Bible school, maybe thinking about becoming a pastor or something. I'd spent some time in missionary work. I was in Amsterdam for a while, and trying to figure out what really suited me as a person and my skills and my passions and what I enjoyed doing. And one thought came to mind is that I'm here to fulfill the Great Commission, as I think all Christians are. There's no Christian that's not a missionary. There's no Christian that's not in full-time ministry. And so I started thinking about, okay, what other, as I started looking at financial services as investment advice and things, I started to think, hey, another aspect of that is that when you talk to people about their money, they have to really open up. They have to give you a lot of insight into their goals and their financial information. And if I could help them reach their financial goals, one of those for a lot of people is going to be, if they're Christians, are going to be wanting to give to their church or give to their charities or give to the things that they're passionate about. And the Great Commission, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, but there's also he owns everything I have, and he is going to use those things for his ends. If I could be involved in funding the Great Commission, making disciples of all nations and baptizing them, there's sometimes there's money involved in that. So that was how I ended up. In part, I won't say that was the whole reason, but that was a factor in deciding on becoming a financial planner, is that maybe I can make a difference on that end too.
Yeah. And did you find that was an easy thing to get involved in as an advisor early on, or did that take some time?
I was shocked when I first started to learn about what they call planned giving. I went to some workshops, seminars from experts in it, and I could not believe how sophisticated some of the tools are involved in that. Mostly it's around. The thing that I think clicked the most to me was when someone said that all the money that we give in taxes is really social capital. It's like we don't really have the option, unless we want to break the law, of holding on to that money entirely. It's like the government's going to take it from us in some way, and it's going to be used for what the rest of society, whether it's defense or whatever reasons that they think are good to spend that money on for society. And then I started to realize by learning from these experts is that we have some control over that social capital. It doesn't all have to go to the government. If we say, look, this portion of it, I'm going to redirect over here. I may not be able to spend it on myself because it's social capital, but I might have control enough to put it where I want it to go instead of where the government wants it to go. And that's where a lot of the whole planned giving comes to bear. You might have a desire to give to charity, or you might not. But either way, you've got social capital that's going to be spent for our society. That makes sense?
Absolutely does. Yeah, certainly. And I mean, you remind me of the verse when, Jesus responds to, I believe it was Peter, but I could be totally off here, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but the rest of, how we manage the rest of our own capital and our own finances still needs to follow, the guidelines that God gives us for our most effective existence, right?
Yeah.
It's not a set of rules so much as if you want to live most effectively, here's a guidebook, right?
Right. There's effectiveness and there's efficiency too. And you can give, but you can give in such a way that's really inefficient. That doesn't take advantage of the tax rules. It doesn't take advantage of, the things that are out there that the vehicles to really make your giving more efficient too. And if it's not efficient, you're wasting money. You're wasting dollars.
Yeah, not a good example of stewardship. You're reminding me of the years I was in the financial advising industry, and the frustration I had with some clients that had a tendency to not want to be open about everything they were doing. They didn't want anyone to have a holistic understanding of their objectives, essentially, right? And they'd have one person who'd kind of do, a financial plan for this part of their life, and another person who'd do a financial plan for another part of their life. And I'd always try and explain to people, in doing that, I understand to a degree your caution and not wanting everybody to know, or any one person to know everything per se. But in doing so, relative to efficiency and effectiveness, it's like hiring 4 different interior designers to design the inside of your house. And your kitchen might have one theme or aesthetic, and then your adjacent rooms might look entirely different and not really function well together. Do you see that a lot still? Because I want to believe that the industry has, and the consumer side of the industry has grown as well.
Yeah, this doesn't relate. My answer doesn't relate specifically to charitable giving, but I had a client a couple of weeks ago, a potential client at this point. He came to me with $10 million. And he said he's going to split it up between 3 different advisors. And in my proposal meeting that came the next week, I said, look, I don't think you should spread it around 3 different people. Pick one and give it all to that one advisor. And here's why. Here's 3 reasons why. One was it's going to be cheaper, because what I charge for 3.5 million, is I charge more per dollar as a percentage than I do for 10 million. There's breakpoints. So if you put it all in one place, you're going to save money. In this case, he would save, I won't say how much, but it'd be a substantial amount of money in fees. Okay. Secondly, is I can't do my job when I'm only looking at a third of the puzzle. I can't really know what the other guys are doing with their parts of that puzzle, and they might be working against what I'm trying to do through the asset classes they're investing in or whatnot. And then third, just practicality. If I'm meeting with this client quarterly, and we have 2 other guys that he's meeting with quarterly, that's a lot of meetings to have to do, and it's going to get old pretty quickly. I've got to see financial advisor 1, 2, and 3 this month. That's 3 meetings, and maybe they're in different parts, half-hour drive each, and I think it's just going to be a lot less efficient again on his time. I think he'll regret it later. And really, you're working with somebody you trust. We've got all of these regulatory and compliance things looking over our backs to make sure we can't cheat the person that we're working with. And you're going to spend your time a lot better just having good conversations with one advisor that you trust and think does a really good job. So, yeah, I think that fits with what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. And is it frequent that you come across somebody who has this segmented concept, or do most of the people that you work with and that come to you understand like this is a holistic planning concept?
I think that scenario is rare. Almost everybody that comes to me has got the idea right, that I want somebody to kind of bring my whole financial life together and help me organize it and help me take care of those important parts of it, whether it's education planning, estate planning, taxation, or just saving for financial goals and handling the investments around that. There's a lot that goes on in an overall plan, and it takes time to get it all together. And I think it's a good thing to have one guy shepherd, or one group or one team shepherding you through that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm glad to hear that it's a lot more rare than my experience. Yeah. Certainly had found it, but that was, again, 20 years ago. So when you are ushering people into this process and you have found out that they have a personal charitable intent, right? It's not necessarily square one of financial planning. So talk to us a little bit about how you start to walk somebody through the steps to enter into that place where they can be actively doing charitable giving.
Okay. Let's talk about it from the perspective of a Christian and not just someone with general charitable intent. So I think that the place you start with biblical approach to goods and money and finances is that God owns it all, and not just 10%, not just a tithe. He owns every good that I have in my life, every tangible thing that I have, money, possessions, whatever. It all belongs to Him when I've given my life over to the lordship of Jesus in my life. So if I have a truck, I'm driving down the road, it's His truck, and it's going to be used for His purposes. And I have money that I'm using to feed my family because I think that's the purpose that He has for that, or house my family, or educate my child. These are all decisions that run through that first sieve of that first filter of it all belongs to God. But then I have to be a good steward of what He's entrusted me with, and then we start to get into the next sort of steps of that become more the steps of kind of classic financial planning, which would be number one, get out of debt, because the Bible says the borrower becomes the lender's slave. When you're in debt to somebody, you're working for them. I think that there's some that would say that debt is always bad. I don't think that's true. I think there's good debt and bad debt, and I usually differentiate that by debt that is it, if you're going in debt for something, is it for something that is appreciating in value or decreasing in value? The example I would give is that We go in debt for a home, a lot of times a mortgage, because it's increasing in value more often than not. That's the expectation anyway. Sometimes people go in debt for education because they anticipate it to be worth more than the money they're putting into it. So they'll go in debt for that based on the return on investment if they're thinking about it. Now, there's some majors that don't have a very good return on investment, so it's not wise to go in debt for those things at all. Another example on the opposite side is a car. A car is something you should, if you can help it, and eventually you will if you're working in that direction. A car does not increase in value, very, very rarely. I mean, there's like classic cars and stuff like that, but today you buy a car, you take it off the lot, and it's decreasing in value right away. And every mile that you put on it is decreasing in value. And are you going to go in debt for that? Ideally, no. The better way to do it would be to, once you've made your car payments and you've paid off your last car loan, keep making those payments toward the next car, and then buy it outright, or take it as a income stream for to pay the lease off of the larger investment that's paying out an income stream to do that. So there are different ways of doing it, but going in debt for a depreciating asset's not a smart thing. So the first step is get out of debt. The next is to look at your personal responsibilities. You are the one that's taking care of your family and yourself. You're not supposed to be dependent on the government or others. So get in the habit of the first thing is, obviously, you're not obvious maybe, but the first thing as a Christian is we're going to try and give towards the kingdom. Give out of our the things that God already owns all of. Give towards our church. Give towards ministries that we support and have looked at. So a good place to start, but not a legalistic place to start, might be that tithe, that 10%. Make that your first goal, to try to give that away. The next thing is to save for the future goals. And we do this with our children. You set up those little buckets and you say, you earn this for mowing the lawn, put 10% and give it at church, and here's put another 20 or 30% and save for those things you're saving for, and maybe spend a little bit of it too, and separate that out. And that's how financial planning works too. You put 10%, you give that away, give that back to God, and you save some for your future goals. Maybe that's another 10 or 15% you're saving for the future. Once those things are in place, and at the same time as you're saving, you're establishing an emergency fund for those things that surprise you. And usually the emergency fund in classic financial planning is going to be 3 to 6 months of expenses. So those things that pop up, I need new tires on the car, I need to replace the refrigerator or the washing machine, or I lost my job for a couple of months. That's where the emergency fund comes in. So these are just the classic kind of financial planning basics with a Christian aspect to it, and the giving part of it. So and after those things are in place, then you're starting to invest and decide on the investments.
I'm curious, since we last spoke, or I guess it was a little bit ago, but we talked about the primary function of my company has been to help with capital planning and capital reserve planning for big organizations that have a lot of these long-term major expense types of expense categories, right? Or asset categories like massive roofs, big parking lots, painting these big buildings. Have you had a chance, just in your own time, to think about, obviously there's a 3 to 6 month emergency savings kind of fund that could be used to replace your roof when it needs to go. Do you think for those who own assets that have periodic but predictable large expenses, should that be a financial category of its own, or should that fall into that emergency bucket?
Okay, so a new roof in California is going to be $20,000 to $30,000. I haven't priced it, and that is probably something that is going to happen every probably 30 or 40 years on a house.
That's certainly fair. Obviously the size of the roof with the roofing material type is going to change all that, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think, the long-term maintenance things like that, I don't know if it makes a lot of sense. Most people don't stay in their houses that long anymore. And if you've got this long-term expense bucket that you're funding specifically for a new roof in 30 or 40 years, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. But having maybe that emergency fund being available to at least partially fund that, and maybe the rest could come from savings and other longer-term savings. That might be a better way to do it, I think. I think there might be other smaller expected maintenance things around the house that shouldn't surprise us. Like I mentioned, tires on a car. I mean, they don't last forever. You can, and it's not that big of an expense, and it shouldn't surprise us when a water heater. I mean, they last 10 years. 10 years for your typical tank water heater. Tankless might be a little longer if you maintain it well, but I mean, you should not expect these things to last forever. And having something there to be ready for those things. Gee, it's a surprise. My car needs new tires. I mean, what kind? I mean,
have you never owned a car before?
Oh, I got to change the oil. What?
Yeah.
I mean, those are little things, but
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense to be ready for it. And I think we're just gotten so used to, in the old days, you changed your own oil, right? When 50 years ago, but now people, they expect their cars to go forever and to not have to do any maintenance on them except put gas in the tank. But there's more to it than that. Same with your car. Same with your, I don't know, other things that you have. We were just talking earlier about, cleaning my garage. There's maintenance things that you got to do to make things last longer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe what's your take on this? Maybe if you know that you have a significant inventory of assets that fall into this long-term maintenance thing under your personal ownership, maybe it's a better way to approach that would be to lean towards the higher end of the emergency savings, more towards the 6 months, maybe 7 months.
Well, what I do in investment management now is I break up the investments into goals or buckets. And, this is after you have your emergency fund established, but there's going to be current needs. And so we put in a current needs bucket those items, those funding, and that's going to be for needs in the next 5 years or so. And we're not going to take a lot of risk with that. We don't want it to have the same volatility as the stock market might. So we're going to have a bucket for short-term needs. And then we're going to have a bucket for longer-term needs where we can take more risk, where we can let it, rise and fall with the roller coaster of the market, but we don't have to take money out when it's down. If we're forced to take money out at the bottom, well, that's selling low. The idea is not to sell low; it's to buy low, right? Buy low, sell high. So if you're forced to take money out at a trough in the market, that's bad. But if you have a bucket set aside with conservative investments in that model, that's going to work out better for you.
Yeah.
So that's how we're doing it now.
That makes sense. I know you have involvement with Kingdom Advisors. When did that begin?
Before it was Kingdom Advisors, really. They changed their name maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. I was involved actually with Ron Blue, the founder of this, way before that. Not personally, but he had a video series and education on. It's called Master Your Money, and my wife and I used to teach these courses in the churches we were in about how to manage your money in a Christian way. And we did that for years and years. And then Ron started this program for financial advisors to educate them on Christian financial planning. And I got involved with that way back then. And it's a great organization. They bring together financial advisors who are Christians from all over the country, maybe even the world by now. But and then they have workshops. They have local groups that meet as study groups, and it's a great support for the Christians who are financial planners out there. And they created like a designation once you went through the education process on it and everything. So
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with the group as well and was involved with them for a brief period myself. I just didn't know how far back that went. So that was really cool.
So a long time. Yeah,
Yeah, very long.
long time.
That's cool. Okay, so once you've got your clients that are, establishing their baseline, they've got their budget set, they've started to, pay themselves, they start to share that 10% or more with the church, and they start to um, become more intentional in their giving.
Uh-huh.
Where do you take them from there? How do you approach that?
Well, we talked about social capital, so I think that's probably a good jumping off point is to talk about ideas for um, how to be efficient now with that giving. Because you could just say, okay, I'm going to give I'm going to put money in the offering plate at church, and that's going to be it. But there can be a lot more to it than that. For example, we have several clients here that are churches that just have accounts with us because we've asked them to ask their members that instead of writing a check to the church, why don't you just, if you have a highly appreciated asset that would normally entail capital gains, why don't you just give that stock or what that asset to the church and that the church sell that asset? They don't have to pay a capital gains. So you've just saved those taxes on just simply gifting a highly appreciated asset instead of selling the asset, paying the taxes, writing a check after tax. And that's just one efficiency. But here's some things that are coming up. I think more and more. And what I'm going to do at this point is talk about a couple of just things for common people to give more efficiently, as opposed to the super fancy things that might be involved for the very wealthy. So these are
Yeah,
things that would apply for most people, I think, instead of that person that, I mean, there's great ideas if you're selling a business with very low basis, or if you're, there's just, if you're super wealthy and you want to start a private foundation, things like that. There's lots of different planned giving things you can do, estate planning wise and gifting. And I just want to talk about a couple of things that I think are really efficient ways of giving. And I'll start with those of us who are giving to our church or just giving right now. They just increase the standard deduction in our taxes. And for singles or for married couples, that's gone up pretty high. The standard deduction is something you get to write off on your taxes. But if you give enough to charity and other things, they add up. You would do what's called itemizing your taxes. And if you itemize and it's bigger than your standard deduction, not to get too complicated, then you itemize instead of use the standard. Well, the standard's gotten so big that about 80% of people don't get to write off their charitable donations anymore. If they're not doing anything else, they just don't get to write off their charitable because it's not big enough to be able to itemize and be over the hump of that standard deduction. So one of the things we've counseled people to do, and all of the things I'm going to talk about right now, some of them I'm doing myself. The ones I'm not doing myself are because I'm not old enough yet. But and I'll tell you that'll be the next one. But this one, a great way to manage that is simply to lump your charitable contributions into for 2 years into 1 year. So in 2019, I added up what I was going to be giving for 2019 and 2020, and I put it all in, and I gave it all in 2019. And then I'm not giving anything to charity in 2020, but I got almost a much bigger write-off in 2019. And then in 2020, I'll just take the standard. And then I'll do this thing again in 2021. This is called lumping and clumping by at least that's how I've heard it described. So that's one way of kind of getting around this higher standard deduction and being more efficient and getting more of a write-off. If you get more of a write-off, that's more dollars in your pocket that you can either use on your own lifestyle or give to your charities. So that's the first very simple idea, and it just takes a little bit of planning. One of the things that makes that a little more easy to manage is something called a donor-advised fund. Now, a donor-advised fund is a lot like a private foundation, only it's for the common man. It takes about usually $10,000 to establish a donor advised fund. My wife and I created one, and you get to name it however you want. We named ours the Global Hope Fund. And if I wanted to, I could do a charitable drive, and people could write checks to my donor advised fund, and they would be tax deductible if they wrote them to that donor advised fund. But I don't use it for that. I use it to just manage my own personal giving. So when I gave 2 years worth of charitable gifts, I put almost all of my charitable gifts into my donor advised fund, even what goes to the church. And the way I manage that now, is it's just a fund that's investing in whatever's not given out to the charities. It's invested in mutual funds. So I put it all into there first, and that's the funnel that it goes through before it goes out to any charity. Now, the way I use it is, besides funding it with dollars and highly appreciated assets, I could direct a highly appreciated stock over to that and put it right into my donor advised fund, sell it in there, and now it's all available for investment or gifts. Once it's in there, and I have automatically coming out of my paycheck every month, I have money going into there, just like, and to create that automation creates discipline for me anyway in my giving. Then I have automated going out, and I just go to the donor advised fund website, and I say, okay, I want to give every month. I'm going to give something to my church, and they get a certain amount every month. The other thing I did, though, is I picked 12 charities I want to give to. It just 12 months in the year, 12 charities, and I can be much more picky about the charities I give to if I've limited myself to 12, because I'm going to research those 12. I'm going to make sure they're quality organizations, and then each month I pick a different charity to give to throughout the year. So each month, then I'm going to have something go to my church and something to go to one of those 12 charities. And each month I'm thinking and praying about those charities, praying for them and looking at them. And then once a year, my wife and I sit down and we look at our list of charities in there, and we make decisions about what we're going to do for the coming year. We usually do that in October or November, and then we're making our plans for the next year. So the donor advised fund is a great vehicle for, I'd say, middle class giving. It has to have usually 10,000 to fund it initially, but it's a great way to go for organizing and managing all those gifts. Now imagine this. As part of my kind of death planning, or wills, estates, things like that, I want money. If I'm going to give money to my daughter as an inheritance, do I want that money, if I've got two asset classes of my non-IRA money and my IRA money that could go to my daughter? Let's say let's say I'm in her shoes. Do I want to receive money coming from a non-IRA or money coming from an IRA? Well, the money coming from a non-IRA at my death is going to get a stepped up basis, and she's going to get all of it tax free. The money coming from an IRA is going to be all, if she takes it out and spends it, it's going to be all ordinary income tax on it. So it's going to be somewhat less than the dollar amount that's in there. However, if I give money from my IRA to charity at my death, that charity can then, take it and spend it without paying taxes on it. So one of the things I'm going to do is, if I'm going to give money to charity at my death, I'm going to have that. I just took my IRA, and as one of the beneficiaries, I said, make one of the beneficiaries be my donor advised fund. So when I die, it goes into that, and my daughter will take over that later, and she'll be able to manage that donor advised fund to give to whatever charities she wants to give it to later.
Do so I assume that's assuming your spouse has already passed as well?
Yeah. I mean, my wife would obviously get anything from me, but at some point we're both going to die.
Yeah, so she'll get it without that tax ramification as a spouse.
Oh yeah, the IRA.
Next generation,
That's right. My wife is the first beneficiary on my IRA, but after we're both gone, then it's going into the donor advised fund. So that tool of the donor advised fund is useful for that lumping and clumping method we just talked about, for making use of our itemizing of deductions rather than the standard deduction. But it's also useful for just general day-to-day giving and organizing that.
That's really cool.
So those are two, I think, really practical ideas that almost any any one of us could use in today's kind of middle class environment. You don't have to be super wealthy to use those items. Now,
Yeah. Can I ask you a couple questions on that?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I hope these aren't too specific because obviously there's probably variations, but you mentioned typically it takes about 10,000 to start. Do some, maybe not all, but do some, if you're aware, allow that to fluctuate, like for a balance to go under for a period and then come back over? Okay.
Oh, yeah. They just want to start it at 10. If you drop below that, they're okay with it. They just want to start it there usually. I've seen them as high as 20 to start, but some are 10. I haven't seen too many under 10, but once you start it and you start to give grants from it, you can drop below 10. As a matter of fact, I've seen them where we established a donor advised fund without any money in it at all on the anticipation of eventual death and that it would be funded at death from a bequeath. Yeah. And we were allowed to do that, but it had to be communicated to the manager of the donor advised fund, because if it just sits there with nothing in it, eventually they close it. But if we communicate that, hey, we're going to fund this later at death, and usually you're doing that with someone who's older, closer to the finish line.
Yeah. So from an ongoing operations standpoint or just operational level, you mentioned the idea of lump and clump in that strategy. Would that mean that whatever portion that you were, like you said, you made contributions for 2 years during 2019.
Yeah.
So none of the outflows are happening during 2019 or 2020, excuse me?
No. None of the contributions to the donor advised fund are happening in 2020.
Sorry, that's what I meant. It's the contributions.
All of my donations, all of my charities don't see any difference.
Yeah.
Because it all went into the donor advised fund. They're all on monthly grants, and so they're all continuing to get their monthly grants, even though I got all of the donation write-off in 2019.
Yeah. Okay. And then for people who aren't trying to lump and clump, they can just do that on a regular, like you said, mechanistic.
Right. Yeah. It just happened to be really helpful in the lump and clump in that I didn't want to give all of my charitable donations in 2019 to those actual charities. I wanted them to get it on a monthly basis, just like regular. And so I could put it in there and then just have it on the schedule to be automatically sent out.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I certainly, I'm going to myself look more deeply into that too. And then the fund itself is typically just all that reporting and all of that is handled at the fund level.
Yeah, the reporting on it makes things a lot more easy too, because at the end of the year, if you give to a lot of charities, you're getting all of these receipts back. You gave XYZ this amount and this other charity this amount, and you have to manage all of those when you're preparing your taxes. Well, I just have one that comes back from the donor advised fund that says you gave this amount of money to the donor advised fund, and that's my proof for the taxes for my 1040.
That's awesome. Very cool. I appreciate that. That's really nice.
Everybody should have a donor advised fund. I think they're really good.
Yeah, they sound very simple.
Yeah, and the part that isn't going out to charity is invested, in mutual funds. So hopefully that's growing too and increasing the amount you're giving too.
Yeah. Are there limitations on what can be held, or is that per?
It kind of depends on the organization a little bit, but and there are some limitations on what can be the funding sources of it. For example, this is probably the next subject is when you turn 72, you have to take required minimum distributions from your IRA, right? And those have to come out every year, and they increase in percentage as you age. It used to be 70 and a half, now it's 72. Beginning this year, really beginning next year, because this year's a special year. They actually said you don't have to do required minimum distributions this year in 2020, but that we'll just forget that for now. But one of the things people do with that is they do something called a qualified charitable donation or distribution, QCD. And that is where you can take your required minimum distribution from your IRA or a portion of it and send it directly to a charity. Now, how is that beneficial? Well, one, if you send it directly to a charity, it never hits your income. It's just like getting a write-off for the entire amount going to charity. And we just talked about how this higher standard deduction made it so a lot of people don't get to write off their charitable donations. Well, if you're in that group, you're not getting to write off your charity. Then what if you just did a QCD, a qualified charitable distribution from your IRA directly to charity? Now you're writing it off again. But I mean, that's only for people older than 72 at this point.
Now, is that deductible regardless of whether or not that amount is bigger than their standard?
Yes, because it never hits their tax return. It never hits their income. It's gone directly to charity from their IRA, and it's in essence, you never paid taxes on it because it went straight to charity, and they never paid taxes on it either. They just got it as a gift out of your IRA. Now, normally, if you took it out of your IRA, what would happen to it? You'd have to pay taxes on it as ordinary income, right? That required minimum distribution is set up for the pure purpose of the government being able to tax your IRA because you've held on to it longer than they want you to. You've had it. You're now 72, and they're saying, "Hey, this is long enough. Start taking it out of that IRA and paying us some taxes on it." So if you take it out, you're going to pay ordinary income tax on it. Let's say it's $10,000. Take it out, and you're in a 24% tax bracket. That's $2,400 you had to pay in taxes to end up with $7,600, and now you write a check for $7,600 to charity, right?
Yeah.
And you don't get to write that $7,600 off. Plan B, use your QCD, send $10,000 to charity, and it never hits your income.
Yeah, I'm assuming there's probably this hybrid point in the middle too, that could be, and we'll talk kind of high level. I'll try to talk high level so that we're not getting too specific, and maybe my understanding is outdated, so correct me if I'm wrong here. It used to be that too much income in your senior years would impact how much your Social Security income, if you were receiving Social Security income, would also be taxed. So you could end up having RMDs come from your required minimum distributions coming from your retirement plans, push you over a threshold that overtaxes your Social Security income. And if you don't need that, that might be a great place for that qualified charitable distribution. Is that what it was?
Yeah, that's actually, you're touching on a couple of things that, first of all, I should say any of these ideas I'm giving right now, you should run them past your tax preparer, your financial advisor, see how they fit your individual situation, because everybody's different individually. And especially when you start looking at taxes, there's breakpoints on not just what you mentioned on Social Security taxes, that up to 85% of your Social Security could be taxed if your income's too high, which you can reduce and control a little bit by using these QCDs. But also, that's Social Security, but also Medicare. The amount you pay towards Medicare is in a tiered bracket as well. So if you go above a certain level, you're going to pay anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200 more just for your Medicare by hitting that next income bracket. So that's something to pay attention to also.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would hope this entire conversation is on some levels sparking the thought in people's minds. There's immense value in working with a professional financial advisor and a professional tax advisor, right?
I think so.
But, I think two great examples right there, especially, the sensitivity for people on fixed incomes to be efficient, right? Because they can't control much where their money's coming from. They can control how and from what sources potentially. So I think planning becomes more sensitive. I think easy way to say that as you get older.
And what you said about hiring a financial advisor, what I do for my clients, I always tell them it's not rocket science. It's not like you need an advanced degree to manage your money. It really isn't that difficult, but it does. The education process can be very, very expensive in learning about it if you're doing this thing and making your own mistakes along the way. But I think that I look at it a lot like changing the oil in my car. We talked about that earlier. I can do that myself. I know how to do that, but I never do it. I delegate it. There are things in life that it makes sense to delegate, and I delegate that duty. It costs me very little to get my oil changed in my car, but the guy that's doing it, he's an expert. He knows what he's doing. He also can get rid of the waste a lot easier than I can. He also can, maybe while he's there, he finds something else that needed work on it, and he's gonna alert me to issues and problems that are going on there as well. And I think there's an analogy to that, and having professional services of whether it's financial planner, legal, whatever. It's usually best to find somebody you trust instead of educating yourself from scratch.
Yeah. It's a lot. I mean, you mentioned last time we spoke about how long it takes to go through even the CFP process, right? It's not,
a couple of years.
It might not be rocket science, although I think that might be selling it a little bit short too. It's involved, right? I mean, how often does tax code get revised and changed and all these rules, and COVID comes along and suddenly all these rules get thrown out, but just temporarily, right? And so
someone a long time ago, I told you my background in wanting to be a doctor at one point. And someone said, if you're a heart surgeon, the heart doesn't really change. It's pretty much the same organ all the way through. And maybe you're learning new things about how to fix it and all of that stuff. But if you're dealing with taxes or the law, it changes like every year. You have to have a lot of continuing education going on. So that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say it changes more like your baby's diapers need changing. It's all the time. Just never stops.
Yeah.
But no, I appreciate that. Okay. And I appreciate you answering some of those kind of more specific questions about just the operations of getting involved in a donor advised fund or how they work on a ongoing basis. That's pretty cool. Lots of flexibility in there.
Yeah, thanks. I think those are good ideas. They're very practical too.
And you mentioned you are involved in donor advised funds yourself. Is this something you work with?
Yes.
We're going to backtrack just a tiny bit because I'm curious. There might be some people out there that still don't understand the purpose of a living trust in general, right? And simple kind of estate planning 101. Do you want to walk through a little bit about that value?
Well, I before I do that, I have to say I'm not an attorney. Trusts are the realm of attorneys, and I can only give and this is departing from the area of really charitable giving, but this will be a financial planner's point of view, not an attorney's point of view, if that's okay.
That's okay with me. I appreciate the disclosure, and we'll keep it at primer level anyway.
Okay. So the living trust or the revocable living trust is really what it is. It's revocable because it can be revoked. It's come about because of there's several different goals that could control that. Mostly when you die, you think, oh, I have a will, and I have a will that's going to tell people where I want my assets to go when I die. The problem with a will and this is the main reason most people have a living trust, is the problem with a will is that it gets probated. It goes through the probate process. Now, that probate process is not a great thing for most people. I mean, when it goes from husband to wife, there's not a probate process. It's when it goes to the next generation. So the probate process is, first of all, it's expensive. It costs money. There's set attorney and court fees that can amount to a large number. It's also takes a long time. It could take a year or more to go through this process. And the third thing is it's public. It's a court proceeding, so it's all in the public realm. If you can avoid probate, you should attempt to do it. And so the will that most people use to direct their assets at death is a probatable vehicle. It goes through probate. There's ways of minimizing how much goes through probate, like using beneficiary designations on retirement plans and IRAs. Those beneficiary designations avoid probate. That's one way. But the living trust is going to be used for other assets that don't fall into those categories, like your house or your non-IRA assets or investments. So that's one reason people do a living trust, is to avoid probate. Another reason people use a trust is to control those assets when it comes to directing which beneficiaries get what. In the same way a will would, the the living trust will do that as well. A third reason people use a living trust, and it's not as used for this anymore, is to minimize estate taxes. Now, years ago, estate taxes would start to hit if you had more than $600,000 of assets. Now that number is north of $10 million between husbands and wives, and so it's becoming less and less needed for most people. But that may not be there forever, and that'll be much more complicated to talk about how it would save money in estate taxes. But that is another reason for the living trust. So, but the vast majority of us that have living trusts are doing it for avoiding probate and also directing assets to beneficiaries. In the process of setting up a living trust, most attorneys do it as a package thing that involves also taking care of what's called powers of attorney for if I'm unable to make decisions on my own regarding money or healthcare. There's documents involved in that package that's going to take care of that as well. Powers of attorney, or what they call a living will, or advanced healthcare directives. What do you want to have happen if you're unable to make healthcare decisions on your own? So those are all packaged in the typical estate plan, living trust. Now, a lot of people think, I've done my living trust, I'm done. For one thing, once you have a living trust, think of it as an envelope that you need to put assets into that it's going to control. Many people do their living trust and never have it own anything, so it's a completely worthless document. So if you do a living trust, make sure you change and have your large assets be owned by that living trust. Secondly, is that tax laws change. There's marriages and deaths and divorces and all of that. You should be re-examining your living trust, having it reviewed every 3 to 5 years by an attorney also.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a great high-level intro to their use. I'm assuming you probably do quite a bit with your clients in concert with their attorneys in making sure that's all organized well. Very cool. Well, I know you, like you mentioned, have some time limitations of your own as well, but before we get up against those on a hard level, any other, I guess, 2 or 3 final thoughts about, if people are sitting there going, these are really good ideas. I need to really sit and digest and think about, what do I really care about? What do I really want to pursue supporting beyond myself? Recommendations for those people?
You always surprise me with questions that I'm not as prepared for, but I was preparing more of practical stuff on this. But I think when you start everything with prayer, right? And you're spending time in God's presence and asking for Him for wisdom. It says in James, if anyone of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. And I think that's the starting place, is to pray for wisdom on how to be a good steward of the time, treasure, and talents that He's given you. And it really should not just be limited to money. Yeah, you have time and you have talents also, and all of those things belong entirely to God if you're a follower of Jesus. And so I think you need to spend time on your knees asking for wisdom and direction for those. For how you steward those things, and being careful with those things, not just handling it loosely.
Yeah.
So,
and then to kind of go back to what you just mentioned, practically, what are steps that people should look at?
Well, the steps I mentioned at the beginning of trying to get things organized as far as automation, if you can have things automatically going to charity out of your checking, going to your savings. When I do education in like a 401k plans, we'll go out and talk to people about managing their money, and we'll say, the people who are successful financially, there's a common trait, and that's that they pay themselves first. In other words, if you have the person at the end of their life that was successful financially and the person that was not successful, you'll find that the person that was not successful, they went through and they spent their money, and then whatever was left at the end of the month, they saved that, or they put that toward their charities, or they paid themselves last though. And guess what? Every month at the end of the month, they run out of money and they don't have anything to save. The person that was successful, they paid themselves first. They said, whatever it was 5%. They said, I'm going to pay myself first, and then whatever's left over, I'm going to live off of. And every month they put something for their savings or toward their giving, or those disciplines that they were doing with their money. And then they had their lifestyle come after that. Those two individuals live almost exactly the same lives. But that person that was successful in a given month, they might not go out to dinner one time because they just didn't have enough in their budget. And budget might be a bad word, but it's stewardship. It's tracking, and it's handling your money on purpose and with purpose. So I think those would be the basic way of kind of looking at stewardship in that context.
Yeah. You mentioned every fall you sit down with your wife and kind of evaluate, your plan for the following year. Are there suggestions like that you equip your clients with that, we should all be making and taking time to intentionally, with deep forethought, look at, the next year, the next three, the next 5?
I have some proprietary tools that we give our clients that involve, electronically managing their funds and their budgets and their spending, and their, there's tools that we can use to spreadsheet and calendar and things like that. I can't do it here, but the technology available today has made a lot of that super easy to we spend a lot of what we spend using credit cards now, even if we're paying off our credit cards every month and not using it as a debt vehicle, but just a convenience vehicle. By the way, that's really super important. Don't ever pay interest on a credit card. Pay it off every month. That's super important. You're going to get 18 to 21% on a credit card is just crazy interest. And so use the credit card companies instead to just, use the credit card and then pay it off at the end of the month, and you never pay a finance charge. And that's the way to go on that. But if you're using a credit card, it's all electronic. Every financial institution has a website that you can log into and look at what your history is. Well, there's, and this is what I was saying, proprietary software that we use is that we'll give to our clients is a way to aggregate everything onto one dashboard. And it brings in all of your spending on your credit cards and mostly categorizes it. There's just not all hands off. You still have to do a little bit with it, but then you can see how everything's spent. It's all automatic. It brings all of your investments accounts into one screen. It's called aggregation software. It brings it all into that same dashboard screen. You have your life insurance on a different part of your dashboard. You have your documents. There's like a vault there to store your trust and your passports and things. So we have lots of tools that help people with their finances and their management of them. And there's really, in the old days, you'd have a handwritten ledger, right? And it was kind of a pain. These are the really old days. I'm 59, but I've pretty much always had some form of technology I can use, but I never did it that way, but I've heard about it.
I've seen them. Yeah. No, awesome. Well, I appreciate it. I think you've shared a ton of value today. So one, thank you so much for taking time again out of your day to help us understand really how to, live intentionally rather than, on accident.
Great. Yeah. And if there's people out there that want to get in touch, you have like a link you'll add at the bottom, or
yep,
is that how you do
absolutely.
It?
Yep, I'll throw up all of your, not throw up, I will post.
Okay.
I will absolutely post all of your contact information again and make sure it's available for people. That'll be on our main page, the Be the Church website, under our blogs and updates. All of our podcasts are there, and Do you want, for those who are just listening and might not get a chance or remember to go, do you want to share your website or phone number?
Yeah, sure. Phone number is 805. I'll give you the 800-200-8028. Website's wealthcarealliance.com.
Wealth Care Alliance.
Wealthcare like healthcare. Wealthcarealliance.com. And my email address is jim@wealthcarealliance.com.
Perfect. Yeah, that'll be beneficial for those who don't go to the website. But yeah, we'll absolutely have all your contact information there again as well.
Awesome.
And I believe in your world, they don't really let you do a whole lot on social media, so there's probably not social media links.
No.
Yeah.
I do it on, I mean, I use social media for more personal stuff, and I don't use it for marketing in any way.
Yeah.
It's more just my own fun stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like you said, you're in a very highly regulated industry, so that makes sense. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jim.
You're welcome, Chad. It's good to talk to you again.
You as well. We will reconnect soon. Maybe do some workouts together here.
Yeah, yeah.
Show me how far. Wow, I can't speak anymore. Show me how far behind I have fallen.
No, you could kick my butt in some things, I think.
Yeah, maybe one or two, but it's not going to be a lot of them. But definitely appreciate your time, sir. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Thank you, Jim.